And a good example of this is you can speak to people who've worked multiple jobs. They play multiple roles in their lives. And I don't mean the kind where, you have one part-time gig, one full-time gig, and you're enjoying both. I mean the kind where you're going from job to job multiple times a day, trying to make a living for your family. There's very little consistency in that kind of life because the only goal is to survive. And for those kinds of people, you will be able to see just how highly stressful that way of living is. So if I was to bring it back to your question, do we need consistency in our lives? I don't even think it's that we need consistency in our lives. I think it's that it's the only way we can understand the world. We naturally are inclined to search for consistency. We as human beings do not like inconsistency. Where there is inconsistency, we tend to draw a box around it and say this thing doesn't make sense, or this thing is not in the best state it can be. So yeah, just to kind of start the conversation, I think that's what I would say, that we need consistency in our lives because it's the only way that as humans we're able to actually perceive the world in a meaningful way.
Okay, interesting. So I think the way you've linked perceiving the world, the only way we can perceive it as a human, I want to dive into that a little bit. So with consistency, we started with why we might need it, but if we look a little more into the perspective you're talking about for how we can perceive things in the right way and not be, you said it was quite strange to us when we find inconsistency. How exactly does consistency actually influence our perspective? Or in a more general sense, what would you say it means to be consistent with a more practical example, let's say?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a moment ago things might have actually been quite abstract. So let's definitely try and get a bit practical, a bit back to the real world. I think the first thing I would say is that when you start to think practically about consistency and you start thinking about your own life and saying these parts of it are consistent, these parts are inconsistent, I think one thing here is it's important to not reason about this in a way that puts pressure on yourself. If you're striving to live a perfectly consistent life, then maybe at some point your life could be automated away because you're just becoming a robot. If instead you're living a consistent life where the consistency is just a means, it's just a tool to get you somewhere, then that makes a lot of sense, I think. So I think there's different kinds of goals you can have in your life. They can be simple, straightforward goals like, I brush my teeth every day so that I don't cause everyone around me to have a terrible day because they don't know how to tell me, and then etc.
Yeah.
But there's another kind, which is when you want to achieve a really big goal. So that goal could be you want to get into a great university, you want to get that great role that's opened up, you want to challenge yourself to run a marathon or etc. I think in those kinds of cases, that's where consistency is key. No sports person has just dropped out of the sky and just started running 10-second, 100-meter races. It's a lot of consistent effort, sustained effort. And I think it plays into two key things, two insights. One is you can't achieve big things in life without consistent effort. And I want to come back to this in a moment. The other is as human beings, we don't evolve from 1 to 100 straight away. We evolve with small steps. We don't just become a Mozart in one day or understand the theory of relativity from Einstein in one day. You have to build that knowledge up, and that's very much the kind of species we are and the kind of tools we have available to us, wherein we accumulate information. We don't just have it downloaded into us. And again, we can come back to this because there's a world where this does actually happen. Now, on the first thing that I wanted to come back to, which is that to achieve big things in your life, you need to be consistent. We are on a platform where we're speaking about, the principles of a science and meditation called Vihangam Yoga. And in Vihangam Yoga, in this practice, which has spanned thousands of years, today it's called Vihangam Yoga, but it's a timeless science. Throughout its entire lifetime, from the start of time until now, the masters of this practice and of this knowledge have all been what you could refer to as relentless. And they've always had the one goal, which is, I want to know how this universe works, and I want to meet, the so-called energy binding it together, if they really exist. So in that process, this tradition of yoga, in this tradition of yoga, you will meet sages who have practiced meditation for, days to months to years to decades without stopping. Some, I'm not even getting into the depth of it. But the point is, in this tradition where the goal is to understand yourself and then understand, you could almost call it the supreme self, the energy that binds things together, which you experience when you meditate. You don't think about it, you don't believe in it, you experience it. When you start to walk this path, which is really the path of self-discovery, then without consistency, you cannot get anywhere, because consistency is effort, and effort is what you could refer to as karma. And without karma, there is no fruits. Without any action, there is no outcome, to keep it simple. And so if you don't apply any effort, and you don't apply any consistent effort, sustained effort, you're not going to achieve those big things in your life. And I've given you an example from the spiritual world of those who have become masters of this tradition. But you can easily see parallels in any part of the world, in any part of your life. That's just how the world works. That if you want to achieve big things, you have to be that stubborn, annoying, relentless person who just doesn't stop. People ask you, like, are you out of your mind? Like, why aren't you stopping? But you have to keep going. And I think where consistency comes in is knowing, how you go through that process. So, often people relate consistency, or they conflate, I should say, they confuse consistency with routine. They're not the same thing. Consistency is that you just keep doing it. You don't stop. Routine is you do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
So, it's totally okay. You can be a very consistent person if you meditate every day, twice a day, even though you might not be doing it at exactly the same time every day. You're still being consistent. So that's another thing that can kind of free the pressures a bit, I think. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but what I would say is the function of consistency is, if you want to achieve big things in your life that cannot be achieved in a day in particular, and is more like a journey you have to go on, where you have to completely evolve and transform yourself, then you need consistency. Because that's the tool that we have in our toolkit that really lets us human beings become these incredible, limitless people who can achieve all our goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was inevitable to talk about human potential with consistency. And I wanted to dive into this a little bit more, where, you've talked about how consistent effort takes us towards big things, and it helps us achieve our goals much quicker. And not only does it help us achieve those big things, but it makes us capable to achieve more. How can we actually go about changing our habits, or maybe directing ourselves to be more consistent? We sometimes fall into the trap of being a bit lazy or not finding that motivation. That there might be various reasons where we lose that drive to have a consistent effort towards achieving what we want to. So how do you maybe go about keeping a consistent effort or getting back on track?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. What I would say here is more important than consistency, which is just a tool, is the goal you set. If you've set a goal that really invigorates you, like it's really exciting, but it's also making you nervous, that is the best kind of goal. So, as an example for myself, I, by my profession, am a product engineer, and so I help build software products and experiences that people consume around the world. Now, whenever I set myself, let's say, professional goals, or I set myself personal goals in my personal life, the underlying question is just how far can I go? And that's really the way that I tend to shape my goals, because, a goal should be something that is far away, or it feels far away. And to get there, you have to, if you were to invoke a bit of physics, you have to operate at a certain velocity and progress at a certain velocity consistently to finally get there after a certain period of time. Now, if we set the goal of, I want to be able to run 10 kilometers in under, 30 minutes, let's say. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm just guessing.
That'd be really fast.
Yeah, okay. So if you set that goal, and that's good that it's really fast. So the first thing when you set a goal should be, okay, how do I even do this thing? I think that's the best kind of goal. How do I do this? Like, it's everyone I'm talking to is saying it's impossible. So the best thing to do is try to form a habit around it. So, okay, I'm not going to do 10 kilometers every 30 minutes. Why don't I start by, rather than trying to reach, 1,000 steps ahead, kind of similar to your, some of the imagery that, we've discussed in the past around, building a stairway one step at a time. So rather than trying to get to the last stairway straight away, what is the first step you can take? And what is the habit you can form that gives you that capability and that time to keep pushing yourself towards your goal? So maybe what you decide is, okay, I'm going to get up in the morning every day and I'm going to go for a 1 kilometer run. And I'm going to start by trying to do that in 5 minutes and then bring that down to 2.5 minutes. And then once you reach there, at that point, your legs are strong enough that you can then say, okay, I want to do 2 kilometers in 5 minutes. And then I want to do 3 kilometers in 7.5 minutes. And then you just keep building this up, but you can't get lost. That's the key. That's the most important thing. And yeah, like you if you have this big goal and you've sliced it into smaller goals, don't set so many smaller goals that you never get to the bigger goal, because that in itself is a distraction. You have to be very careful. So, just make sure you're clear okay, this next goal I'm setting, is that actually moving me towards my bigger goal? And in this case, you would say, yes, it is. But maybe you want to grow your goals more with a bit more ambition. You don't want to say, I want to go from 1 kilometer to 2. You want to say, I go from 1 to 2 to 5, right? So I really think, if you're in your life and you're struggling to find consistency, I would suggest that you look at your goals again. You know, if you have a really exciting goal, something that makes you nervous but you really want to get there, that passion itself will drive you to apply consistent effort. I often find in my own life that consistent effort is something that happens, right? It's something you discover when you reflect on how you got somewhere. It's not something you're conscious of when you're doing it in the best scenario, I think. And yeah, like I don't think the focus should be on consistent effort. It should be on the outcome, which is I want to get this thing and achieve this thing in my life. Because that's what's going to get you to build those habits. As a small example, just to finish my little reflection here off, your goal in life isn't to brush your teeth every day. Your goal is just to have clean breath, right? And when you wake up, you're not trying to say, okay, today is the 100,000th day that I'm now going to brush my teeth. It's going to be amazing. It's not. It's just keep it simple. You're trying to have clean breath, right? So again, I'll treat it as a tool, but the tool is not the important thing. The goal is.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there is how we've started to frame consistent effort as our tool, and the actual goal that we're going for as the main way that we're able to apply that consistent effort without, losing interest, losing motivation. But there's one layer before this now, which we might start to think about when we think of the word, focus or approach mentally. So mainly just focus. If we have a really interesting goal, like let's just set a picture with the running example you gave, and you really want to achieve that goal, then yes, you will have that motivation and you will automatically get up and get going. But slowly and often, for all of us, we will observe that with so many thoughts driving us in all those different directions from our mind, it's difficult to actually keep our focus, even if the goal is interesting, if that makes sense. So even with an interesting goal, there are situations where we're torn apart, we're distracted, and as someone who's practiced meditation for a few years now, how do you think that meditation helps in binding this all together? How can meditation help you apply consistent effort and remain focused on your goal?
Sure. The one sentence answer really is that meditation is a practice in which you learn how to focus.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean in terms of, the general concept people might have about meditation, that you go into a room and you focus on a certain point or a certain the light of a candle. Meditation is an ancient art form which allows you to become aware of the energy that you spend every day, and then to take decisions about that energy. And I don't mean decisions, at different points of the day. I mean at all times of day. So if you speak with a yogi, a true yogi, and if you had some kind of device that was able to monitor, where is this yogi's energy focused right now, you will always find that yogi's energy is focused on exactly where they want it to be focused at every point in time.
Yeah.
And when I say at every point in time, I don't mean every second, I mean every moment. They are masters of their own existence. And that self-mastery means that if you ask a yogi who has never run a marathon before to run a marathon, they will ask you, what is the process for me to learn how to be good at that thing? And then they will diligently practice that process, master that process, and run that marathon. And you can do this with every field, every form of knowledge in the world. Throw it at a yogi, they will master it. Why? Because they have mastered the art of practice itself. That is what yoga is about. And if I was to take an example of the master of Vihangam Yoga, Sadhguru Siddhartha Maharaj, he is a clear example of this very property, which is common to the masters in the yogic tradition. He had mastered, his goal was to understand who the supreme energy is, and if he really exists, who he is, right?
Yeah.
So he went around India, and he learned every technique under the sun, and he would apply himself in a sustained way for years, master that practice, see what it gave him, and then move to the next one. By the time he achieved his goal, he had mastered every form of yoga in India. And mind you, India is a country of hundreds of millions of people. And, there's so many masters in India of different facets of spirituality. And he mastered all of those different facets and then finally came to a complete picture of what this tradition and this practice really is. So, he in his great epic Svarved, where he describes his own experiences in the spiritual tradition, he speaks through the importance of being, consistent, of applying consistent effort to achieve those big goals. And in the case of Svarved, the goal he speaks about is to master yourself, to discover yourself and what's beyond. I think it's just the most clear description of what consistent effort is and how to get there. And what it really comes down to is being able to control and master your own energy that you spend every day. And what the question is, what is coming in your way, really? Because if the only consistency you have is that you're a great procrastinator, then unfortunately you're never going to achieve your goals.
Yeah.
And the important thing is to dig into, for yourself, what is coming in the way.
So that brings us at the end of part 1 of our discussion on the power of consistency. I think the main takeaway so far is consistent effort helps you achieve big things. It's a nice, simple way to look at the power of consistency and the way that our potential as humans and our ability to achieve our goals is only going to be higher and higher with more consistent effort. No matter how talented or naturally skilled you might be, hard work will always beat talent. And the best way for us to stay focused in that process is meditation. So thank you for tuning in this week. We hope you have a lovely and safe week ahead. And we'll see you next week with part 2, where we start diving into what happens when things don't go as planned. Jai Sadhguru Dev, and see you later.